They broke into my backyard while I was pressure washing 3 people in matching polo shirts, clipboards in hand, like they were auditioning for a neighborhood SWAT team. One of them was the woman who had moved in 3 doors down and promptly crowned herself HOA president, and the other 2 looked like extras from a bad community theater production. They smashed my gate, started taking pictures, and dared me to call the police. When my wife and I bought this house, honestly, it felt like the dream tree-lined streets, couples walking dogs, porches with rocking chairs. The HOA was a box we checked at closing a little newsletter about bake sales and flag etiquette. For 2 years, it was harmless, mildly annoying background noise. Then Karen moved in, and within 6 weeks, she was president, and within 6 months, the neighborhood felt like an audition for Who Wants to Be a Stickler. It started with trash cans. A photo snapped from a car, my trash can was apparently visible for the briefest minute before I dragged it the final 3 steps into the garage. $50 fine. The next month, it was my lawn being a 1/4 inch too tall, documented with a note and a $50 fee. I measured the blades myself, 2.75 inches, and filed an appeal. Denied. Then my mailbox got dinged for being weathered. $50. A little decorative flag, a crooked house number, a package left on my porch for... We tried to be reasonable. We paid fines when it was cheaper than fighting, and we documented everything when it stopped making sense. I became obsessively defensive, photos at dawn timestamps, emails stacked like armor. I talked to neighbors and learned that a few had been quietly paying up. Some were talking about moving, and a couple were actually hiding plants and patio furniture like contraband. Then Karen announced the HOA officers. That phone book skinny memo that said 3 volunteers would now patrol the neighborhood, issue on-the-spot violations, and protect community standards. She put polos on the men and women she liked, printed up business cards with an embroidered logo that said, Community Officer. And suddenly people were peeking through blinds. One was her next-door retired neighbor who never waved back. One was a young guy I never recognized, and the third was Karen's son, home. They didn't look like volunteers, more like prosecutors with golf clubs. They drove slowly, circled, took weird angled photos, and knocked on doors at dinner time to demand access to inspect sheds and backyards. My wife stopped gardening, too much anxiety about someone photographing a hanging basket, and the whole vibe of coming home shifted from relaxation to reconnaissance. I tried to be smart about it. I created a binder with printed rules, dated emails, and a track of every interaction. I asked a lawyer how far an HOA could push before it became harassment. He told me the usual HOAs have broad authority. They can issue fines, but they do not have police powers. They can't trespass. They can't break locks. They can't decide to enforce rules that don't officially exist and just call it policy. So when I fired up the pressure washer on a Saturday morning, 60-degree weather, coffee on the deck, the sound of water and the smell of spring, I expected the worst to be more notices, maybe another fine. I did not expect the gate to explode open. 3 people shoved through the slats like a sitcom bit gone wrong. We're investigating excessive water use and power equipment violations, the retired guy declared, like he'd been briefed by a cereal box. They were wearing their polos, clipboards waving like permission slips. I shut the washer off and peered through the fence. This was my backyard's 6-foot privacy fence, no visibility from the street. My neighbor's kids couldn't even peek in without climbing. They undid my lock, literally broke it, and strolled across my patio. Photos, videos, commentary. You're in violation of Section 5.2.2. Karen's son read off a phone at me while filming. Power equipment only allowed 10 to 12 on weekends. It was 11:47. My heart went cold with anger, not just because the rules sounded made up, but because they had no right to be standing in my yard. I asked them to leave. I asked calmly, then with more teeth. They refused and said they were within their rights as HOA officers. They dared me to call the police, true story, like it was a gauntlet to be thrown. So I did what anyone who had been pushed one time too many would do. I called 911. There's a tiny, ridiculous pleasure in finally dropping the one official hammer that actually matters. While I was on the phone with dispatch explaining broken locks and trespassers, I could feel the HOA officer's bluster deflating until Karen's son made a choice that would change everything. He didn't stop recording when the police asked. He kept filming the officers in uniform, and then with spectacular poor timing, he kept arguing. The lead cop arrived, older, tired, the kind who knows the difference between power and permission. He read the memo the retired guy waved and then handed it back like a bad joke. "This doesn't give you the right to enter private property," he said. "Did the homeowner consent to your entry?" The retired guy stammered. The son said, "We are enforcing community rules." The cop said, "You are not law enforcement. You cannot break locks. You cannot enter like this." Then Karen's son made the cascade of choices people make when arrogance outruns sense. He refused to cooperate when the officer told him to put his phone down. He argued about rights to record. He got a little loud. In 3 seconds, the cop reached, wrestled the phone away, and put him in cuffs. The retired guy started sputtering. The third guy complied. Handcuffs, then a procession to squad cars. It felt cinematic and surreal, 3 people in HOA polos being led past my kitchen like something out of a movie. My neighbors came out, phones up. My wife stood beside me at the sink, stunned in her robe. There's a sound for neighborhood gossip being born, a soft collective intake, an inlet of updated allegiances. The officers asked if I wanted to press charges. I did. I pressed trespass, destruction of property, harassment. I filed a statement at the station. The police took it seriously, and for once the paperwork felt like actual weight. Those weeks after were a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. We slept easier, but I lost days to meetings calls and paperwork to notarize statements and neighbor interviews. My wife healed slower. Anxiety doesn't apologize. She began walking again because a neighbor offered company, and when she planted a single row of daisies, I felt like we'd reclaimed part of ourselves. People swapped screenshots and receipts, compared timelines, laughed nervously at how absurd it all had become. Small kindnesses multiplied. Someone brought over coffee. Another fixed my gate pro bono, and we learned how to watch out for one another. Word spread. People who had paid fines quietly began to file complaints. 4 families filed criminal trespass complaints. Several more brought civil stories about harassment and invasive inspections. The 2 other board members swore they'd never signed off on the officer program, and once everything came into the light, the HOA community meeting turned into a referendum. We had 40 people in that meeting, 40 neighbors who'd been pushed into paying silence. People stood up and told stories worse than mine: photos through windows, demands to open garages, fines for imaginary violations. Someone had even shoehorned budget money into officer polos and logo materials without approval. The vote was almost theatrical. Karen was removed as president. The HOA officer program dissolved, and the board committed to refunding improperly issued fines. The legal process moved slowly, as legal things do. But the 3 HOA officers faced consequences. Karen's son took a misdemeanor community service and restitution for my gate. The retired guy got probation. The third fellow who didn't live here got fined. We got my lock replaced, a refund check for every fine I'd paid, $450 back in our account, and more importantly, a sense that rules would be enforced only when they actually existed, and only in ways that respected privacy and property rights. My wife and I finished the pressure washing that afternoon, the patio gleaming, and we sat outside that evening with takeout and no one watching. No. But the story didn't end with a check and a new lock. The thing that hung in the air for weeks afterward was a quiet realization, not triumphal, but a slow dawning. Power. Even the tiny power of a homeowner's president will do what power does when unchecked. It expands, seeks justification, and eventually consumes the people who trusted it. Karen wasn't evil in a cartoon way. She was someone who found a way to turn rules into leverage and leverage into ego. That's the scary part. Most of us have been. What felt like justice wasn't only the arrests or the refunds. Those were satisfying, sure, but the way the neighborhood changed afterward. People talked in yards again. Someone organized a weekend barbecue that wasn't a thinly veiled HOA inspection. New board members ran on transparency and decency, and they followed through. The community didn't become perfect, but it stopped being someone's personal playground. If I have a lesson, it is this: document your life and don't confuse inconvenience with inevitability. Bullies rely on people either being too tired to fight or afraid of the hassle. There are times to let things slide and times to draw a line. Pressure washers and trash cans aren't worth nightmares, but when someone breaks your lock to prove a point, that's where you push back. It's messy, it costs you time and stress, and it might not end in fireworks, but sometimes someone has to plant the flag. So yeah, we got a refund, a new lock, and our privacy back. My wife laughs about our pressure washing saga now, And sometimes I still hear neighbors joke about the HOA officer fashion show. But there's a sharper undercurrent to it too, a reminder that laws, rules, and common decency are different things. And when they intersect, you have to be fluent in both. What's your line? When does petty enforcement cross into outright abuse of power? Would you have called the police or paid the fine and kept your sanity? Tell me what you would have done, and if you've ever been on the receiving end of someone using rules as a weapon, share your story below.